welcome to 2819. I'm Sandra Dimes.
And I'm Brian Rohmbacher.
And we have an Earth Day themed show for you today.
Yeah, so excited. I love Earth Day. Maybe next time we record outside, bring some plants in. I don't know.
Maybe. I'm kind of allergic, but we're at least on Earth, so it's kind of fitting.
Yeah, that will count for this time.
Yes. So what do we have on the show today?
Well, we have RTB 101. Chris is going to be speaking with astronomer Hugh Ross about Earth Day in the book of Job.
And in our give and take section, Jeff Zwerink will be talking with philosopher and theologian Ken Samples about the questions that skeptics are asking today. Wonder if they're asking questions about Earth Day.
I hope so. That's going to be a really important segment because we don't want to answer questions that people aren't even asking.
Right.
We want to meet them where they're at.
Yeah, for sure.
What are they asking and get to that. So that's going to be a great segment. First up, those culture talk. Sandra's going to be speaking with ethics professor George Haraksin about taking an ethical approach to Earth Day. Let's check that out.
Welcome to Culture Talk. This is a segment where we talk about culturally relevant topics you can use to start conversations about your faith. I'm Sandra Dimas, and I'm joined today with philosopher and ethics professor George Haraksin. Thank you for joining us today, George.
Thanks, Sandra. I'm really excited about our topic.
I know we're going to be talking about Earth Day, which is on April 22nd. This is kind of a fun, it's a fun holiday because, people have different perspectives on it. But before we dive into the different perspectives that we have, let's first talk about what Earth Day is.
Yeah, we kind of, in the Christian tradition, we have a church calendar and there's high holy days. We just went through Easter or Lent and Easter, Resurrection Sunday. And it seems that more predominantly, there's more, you might call them secular or public holidays, if you will. And Earth Day is one of them. I think it was started in 1970 was the first one, stemming off of more of a awareness about environmental issues. And so it sort of marks the anniversary of the birth of the modern environmental movement.
So it's not Earth's birthday, right? As our director was pointing out, it's Earth's birthday. So we know
I better get a gift then.
I know. Well, so we know then that it hasn't been around for too long. It started in the 70s. But again, we know that people have different views, particularly when we're coming from a Christian worldview. Mm-hmm. So what are some of the different ways that people look at Earth Day?
Yeah, one of the easy ways I kind of put it is, are we stewards or sovereigns in regards to the earth? Are we supposed to steward it or are we sovereign over it? But you can kind of break it down today in three different views. There's what's called the secular view, which has a more anthropocentric stance to it. The focus is on human beings and the use of the earth, how it benefits us, how we can use it. There's a sacramental view, and this is it's called more of a biocentric view rather than an anthropocentric view. Some call it deep ecology. And here the earth becomes more sacred, if you will. It has intrinsic moral value, not just instrumental value, as it does on the more secular view or anthropocentric view. And then perhaps what I would call the biblical view would be the stewardship view. It has a theocentric standpoint. That is, God is the overall Lord and creator of earth, and he gives earth or creation to us as a gift. So not only is salvation by grace, but creation is by grace too. And so it's a gift for us to steward.
So that's really helpful then to explain those different views. I think from if I'm understanding you correctly, a secular view of Earth Day would really just look at humanity as kind of in charge of the fate of Earth. And so we're responsible to be conscious of the environment and how we treat it. And then I think the second view, did you call it a
sacramental?
A sacramental. So that one, it seems like we're almost deifying, in a sense, the earth, where we're elevating it.
Yeah, earth becomes much more of a sacred entity or thing, and it has more intrinsic value. It can become, on some views, an object of worship. It can even be more important than individual human beings. Humanity can even be viewed on this view, and in some cases, as a disease or virus on the planet. So it has a range of nuances, how people hold it, but broadly speaking, it's a biocentric. It's about a deep view about the ecology. Or if you think of something like, it might have been displayed this way in Avatar, if you remember that movie, how that idea comes out. Those two views, sort of a secular and sacramental view, really get displayed in that famous movie.
Right. And so I think that's really helpful. And I think that addresses or points out why some Christians would have concerns about, acknowledging Earth Day, because we could be ignoring God's authority over his creation. And then also we can be leaning toward worshiping the creation instead of the creator. So let's unpack then this stewardship approach. And if we're to take this approach, like, what would that look like?
Yeah, in some ways you could, I think the stewardship view can look at the other two views and say, like on the anthropocentric view or the secular view, it's true that the earth creation it's instrumental in our well-being, right? We consume food. There's animals that we partner, use, even eat. We can also find some common ground with the sacramental view in that it has some sacredness to it, in that it's a gift from God for us, not just to use, but it's a pointer back to who God is, his care for us. We can learn about God through his creation. And so we are supposed to be stewards or trustees of that creation, of the earth that God has placed us on. So there's aspects of dominion. When we provide shelter, we build buildings so that, tornadoes or other things or earthquakes don't harm it. We can get better at doing those things. So we're responsible to use it in a way and to care for it in a way that it benefits humanity.
So George, now I'm wondering what ethical concerns might Christians have when they're contemplating kind of celebrating Earth Day?
Yeah, I think we can actually find some common ground topics to talk about with other people when it comes to Earth Day, to show that we're not flippant, as you say, but we have similar concerns. I mean, just take two, for instance. Under this topic of Earth Day is going to come issues in what's called animal rights or even food ethics. So for instance, in animal rights, a 2015 Gallup poll said 62% believe that animals should be protected from abuse. And I think we can all agree about that. But then further, about a third believe that animals should have the same rights as human beings. And I think here, the theist or the Christian can point out that the biblical view is that humans differ in kind, not just merely in degree from animals. And so we could affirm that animals have interests, and those interests can be protected, but they may not actually have what we might call a right to life. Or we could ask a question saying, how do you ground that right to life for animals? What is the basis for that? How do you support that? And like something when it comes to food ethics, when we talk about animal ethics, it's a natural and practical way that leads you to what you eat and how we care for the earth around food. I mean, you probably have heard of Meatless Mondays. There's somewhat of a vegan revolution going on. I think PETA's most successful campaign, according to their chief marketer, was Jesus was a vegetarian. And so these are all sort of ideas that we can talk about as common ground, and also show some differences between the Christian or the theist and those who hold different views.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I love anytime we can find common ground with people we're talking with, I think that allows us to continue to have more conversations with them. So I love your approach in saying, hey, let's find some common ground as we, maybe celebrate this holiday. So again, thank you for joining us, George. It's always a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks so much, Sandra. It's fun to do it.
If you'd like to hear more from George Haraksin, go to reasons.org and search for George Haraksin.
Now Now it's time for RTB 101, where we discuss practical questions to equip you to share your faith more effectively. And here to help me talk about a Christian perspective and reflection on Earth Day is astronomer Dr. Hugh Ross. Welcome, Hugh.
Well, thank you, Krista. Good to see you.
It's always good to see you. And let's talk a little about Earth Day because, when I look out into the culture, I kind of see basically two approaches to Earth Day. One kind of begins to approach almost creation worship. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there's almost like apathy toward it. So maybe I'm curious, we could start there. What do you see on both ends of that spectrum?
Well, I see a biblical mandate that we are to manage the resources of planet Earth for our benefit and the benefit of all life. And, Krista, you're a mother. I mean, you know what it's like when you tell your kids to clean up their room. As a Christian, I don't want to be embarrassed when the Lord returns and says, look what a mess you've made of this planet I created for you. And don't you appreciate how beautifully I designed it for you to enjoy?
So maybe somewhere in the middle there of those two extremes, we could talk about creation stewardship and being a good steward of what God has given to us. When we think about kind of the foundation of things in Genesis 1, what does God lay out for us about our relationship to the creation?
Well, he basically makes the point that he created the earth, in fact, the entire universe and all life on planet Earth for our benefit and our enjoyment. So although we're not supposed to worship the creation, God made it beautiful. He wants us to enjoy it. So he expects us to appreciate what he has done. I think it's important in terms of, we need to get outside and see what God has done. And also realize, nature declares God's attributes, his glory, his power, his love, his care. So spending time, looking up at the heavens, for example, the heavens declare the glory and the righteousness of God. I think God wants us to look up once in a while. And I think this is important for those of us who live in the 21st century. It's so easy for us to just stay in our little urban environment and not even look at what God has done.
That's so good because especially for those of us who live in cities, that to understand that, yes, the creation does reveal some things about the Creator. So we want to get out there and enjoy that and bring our kids along and have those conversations.
Right.
Now, I also know that the book of Job has a lot of interesting information about creation. It's not just Genesis. When we get to Job, there's wisdom there for us as well. I'm wondering how that book might help us to reflect on creation stewardship as well.
Well, Job backs up what Genesis says about creation stewardship. Basically makes the point that, God has put us in charge of the planet and his resources. And if we look at those resources, everything we need to manage the planet for the benefit of our life, and not just our life, but the benefit of all other life, it's there. So I see that as a mandate. Go out and look. I've given you everything you need. If you don't have what you need, scour my environment and you will find it. Again, as a mother, Krista, I think you appreciate how often your children will say, I can't find X. Well, go look, it's there. And so trying to help them find what has been made available by you, the parents, and what's been made available by God. But what I see especially significant in the book of Job, you get this statement in chapter 12. It says, look to the birds of the sky, look to the beasts of the field. And beasts is a reference to the mammals that wander around on our terrestrial land masses. Look to them. They will teach you. They will instruct you. As you go through the rest of the book of Job, it's making the point. They not only will tell you just how wonderfully Earth and its life has been designed and how it reveals God, it actually reveals important spiritual lessons. Namely, when you look at these creatures, the birds and the mammals, you recognize they have been designed to relate to a higher species. They have been designed to serve and please a higher species. And that should really cause within us to recognize hey, maybe I'm designed the same way. I've been designed to relate to a higher being and to serve and please that higher being. And likewise, when we see these animals running away from us instead of towards us, that kind of tells us, look, it's our sin that causes us, these animals, to be afraid of us and run away from us instead of the way God designed them to come to us and relate to us. And likewise, our sin causes us to run away from God rather than toward Him like we have been designed. And I think when we begin to form a relationship with these birds and mammals, actually begin to invite them into our life, to tame them, to domesticate them, we see that when they're bonded to us in a strong emotional relationship, they can actually do things that their wild cousins cannot do. They'll outperform the creatures in their species that are not related to human beings. And I think there's a lesson there for us. When we are bonded to our Creator, that bond will release within us capabilities and capacities that would not be there if it wasn't for that bond.
So when we talk to our scientifically minded friends and family members and the topic of Earth Day comes up, maybe you could give us a couple things that we should keep in mind, maybe some things we can share.
Well, I think some things we can share is that, today only about 1/3 of the world's population has ever seen the Milky Way. Have you ever seen the Milky Way? Have you ever looked up there and just seen what's up there? And my experience is that when people see the Milky Way for the first time, they're just awestruck. They can't believe that there's that many stars and nebulae up there. And likewise, I encourage them, how much time have you actually spent with wild birds and wild mammals that have not been abused by human beings? And just see how God designed them to come to us, to relate to us, and realize how wonderfully designed they are. I mean, they're beautiful creatures to look at. And the way they love to entertain us and relate and serve to us is amazing. I've had that experience several times, just going out to very wild parts of Canada, for example, where I know humans haven't been in several decades, and just seeing how those animals treat me differently than animals that have suffered abuse by humans. And it has an overpowering experience. Something I've learned too is when I take my scientist friends away from their research labs and out into some, say, beautiful alpine meadow, they'll say things. I've been an atheist all my life, but something's happening to me. I feel like I'm having a spiritual experience. And I think that's part of what the Bible tells us, that nature indeed does reveal God, and we get ourselves up there, we'll experience God in a way we otherwise might not. And it's something I've also seen in my speaking in rural parts of the world. When I go into the rural parts as opposed to the urban parts, almost everybody believes in God. The reason is they're more connected with the nature that God created.
So that's all the more reason for us to be good stewards and preserve the beauty of the creation that God has put around us, and to preserve those relationships with the animals. Thank you, Hugh, for helping us get a little bit more conversant about this important topic. And I want to encourage everyone to check out Hugh's book, Hidden Treasures in the Book of Job.
Hello, Jeff Zwerink. Welcome to Give and Take, the segment of our show where we explore important scientific and philosophical ideas that relate to the truth of Christianity and how you can be more convinced it's true. Today, I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Ken Samples. We're going to be talking about his new book that's coming out. Ken, it's good to have you here today.
Pleasure to be with you, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Always look forward to our conversations. So kind of start us off. What's the name of your book and why did you choose that name?
Yeah, the title of the book is Christianity Cross-Examined, and the subtitle is it rational, relevant, and good? And the reason we came to that title is I really try to scrutinize Christianity. I raise questions about its rationality, about its relevance for today, as well as its goodness. And I also wanted to convey the idea that, it's kind of like a courtroom where there is a hopefully some analysis, not just my opinions, but a give and take, if you will, if you like that title of the show, by the way.
So how did you come to conceive of the idea for this book?
Yeah, I've been doing apologetics professionally since the late 1980s. Before coming to Reasons to Believe, Jeff, I worked with Walter Martin at the Christian Research Institute, hosted the Bible Answer Man, as one of the co-hosts. In the old days, Jeff, when I would go to the university, students would typically ask me what I would call truth questions. Does God exist? Was Jesus raised from the dead? So those are more the truth reasonable types of questions. I noticed, however, about 10 or 15 years ago, when I would go to the university, I started hearing different kinds of questions. They'd still ask me truth questions, but they would start asking me, well, is Christianity really a good religion? I mean, what about all the people that have been killed in church history? What about some of the stories in the Old Testament where God commands the Israelites to kill the Canaanites? What about the so-called dark side of Christianity? So I thought, wow, we seem to be moving from kind of modernism, which focuses on truth, to postmodernism that focuses on goodness. So I use that to divide the book into two parts.
So you get these two parts, one presumably that looks at, is Christianity true? One that looks at, is it good? How does that play out in your book? What does that look like in there?
Well, what I do in the first part of the book is I raise the questions of whether Christianity is really a reasonable faith. So I have questions about science. For example, hasn't science made God unnecessary? Or, if I have science, why do I need faith? So I have some early chapters on faith and science. I also have a chapter about mysteries of the faith, like the Trinity and the Incarnation. How are they logical? How can they be reasonable? And then I have a question in the first part of the book. If God created all, who created God? I discovered, Jeff, in 2017, that was the most Googled question about God. So that first section deals with a lot of, is Christianity reasonable, logical, rational, scientific? The second part then looks at those challenges. I mean, what about people who were killed in the name of God? What about the Inquisition, the Crusades, the 30 Years' War, the Salem witch trials? I then look at some of the biblical challenges. What was happening when Yahweh commanded Joshua to destroy the Canaanites? And I also look at other controversial questions for us today. Why doesn't the Bible condemn slavery? And I address other questions like, why are Christians so unlike Christ in terms of their kind of Hippocratic or hypocrisy and types of things of that nature? So that's how kind of the book is divided and how it kind of cashes out.
It sounds like, as I'm listening to you, that, when you're interacting with someone, they could ask a question, why are there natural disasters? And it seems to me there could be two aspects to that question. One is, how could why would God allow natural disasters? Is there any reason for this? And then the other is, I'm actually dealing with a natural disaster that's caused me pain in some way. And so it's kind of like you're doing a little bit of, I hope this isn't a disrespectful word, but kind of a triage, trying to understand what's really going on. It sounds like you're doing that in your book. So how do we ascertain whether someone's asking a truth question or a goodness question?
It's interesting, Jeff, in that context. I've kind of met two types of atheists. There's one atheist who says, it might not be a bad thing if God existed. Maybe I would survive the death of my body. Maybe I would be reconciled with my loved ones. But there's just no good reason to think it's true. Christianity is not ultimately reasonable. Another atheist, however, would say, no, there's some reason to support Christianity and God's existence, but I don't want that God to exist. I'm turned off by that. I think, Jeff, in this kind of context, I not only want to tell people that Christianity is reasonable, it can pass the rationality test, but I also want to kind of give them a sense that, maybe you should actually hope that Christianity is true, because it really is a good thing. And in the old days, back in the 80s, when I was doing the Bible Answer Man program, Jeff, all I thought about is Christianity true? If it's true, then you should accept it. But a lot of people today don't think that way. They have viewed Christianity as, I'm not sure I want any part of that if I have to accept all these kind of other things. So that's how I see it working in terms of your question.
So, I mean, we've spent a lot of time at Reasons to Believe developing, I would say, a lot of truth answers. Does the Bible align with science? These sorts of questions. How do we answer the question, is Christianity good? What are some of the features of that answer?
Yeah, I spent some time in the book talking about what I call, the very good things about Christianity. Let me talk about them. There was the scientific revolution in the 1600s called the emergence of science. Jeff, the intellectual firepower that produced that came out of the university systems in Europe in the Middle Ages. They were all Christian universities: Oxford, Cambridge, University of Paris, etc. The Christian worldview provided the basis for the birth of science. Moreover, in terms of education for people, the church played a very significant role in allowing learning to continue during parts of the Dark Ages. And early Christians were very much involved in the dignity of people. I mean, ultimately, if you look at the abolitionists who sought to bring an end to slavery, both in England and in America, they were by and large Christian people. So there have been many things that Christianity has done well for the world. And that's not always the case in every other particular religion or worldview.
Well, thank you very much, Ken. I appreciate your comments. I would really encourage you to go to reasons.org, find out how you can get a copy of Ken's latest book. It's called Christianity Cross-Examined. Is it rational, relevant, and good? And you will find just some great material, resources, information to help you see how Christianity is not only true, but it's also good, and how we can use that to spread the gospel.
That does it for our special Earth Day episode. We hope you enjoyed this episode and that it helped equip you to share your faith with confidence and compassion.
And we hope you'll hug a tree today, but also that you'll find us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We are at 2819 Show.
And if you want the audio version, you get it on most major podcast services. Just search Reasons to Believe podcast.
See you next week.
Happy Earth Day. Maybe don't hug the tree though, you're allergic.